So it's been a while, but just like, that's okay. That's fine. We took time off. I say we, I took time off over the university period, and you know, fair enough. Fair enough to me, because that was horrifying. Excitement, whoa. Doing maths is just a thing that I chose. Anyway, I'm back to deliver the news that I read 138 books last year. So I figured we'd review them using 1-2 sentences, give you a rating, tell you if you should read them or not. And you guys can take that recommendation and completely forget about it if you wish. Or you can remember. Everything is up to you. So I have a reading journal with, you know, with books, with book notes, which contains my 138 books. Some of them I don't have physical copies of because I read them either on Kindle or I've already donated them because they were needed to be donated and not to be owned by me anymore. I didn't burn any of them. Not that I've ever burned a book before, but I have ripped one up. 138 books, go me. I'm gonna go through them month by month because that makes sense. I can give you some stats if you want. I don't have any stats. Future Annie's going to look at some stats and she's going to enter the realm of YouTube existence now. Cool. Hope you got some good stats there, guys. Oh, I can't wait to find out what those stats are. Oh my god, I also got a Kindle for Christmas. Maybe I'll buy less books. Maybe I won't. Anyway, beginning with January, because that is the start of the year. In January 2023, I read 9 books. And I think that's pretty good, especially, like, I'm so happy with me reading 9 books. This is my new reading journal, but I put in my old stuff, like a little bit of it, like a graph. So, started the year off with Stay Close by Harlan Coben. This is not, I was about to say it's based on the TV show. It's not, it's the other way around. The TV show is based on this book and I loved the show. I loved it. It was so good. It's just one series, it's on Netflix, it's fabulous. So I decided to read the book and I rated it 4 stars. It was a good book, but I feel like I mainly enjoyed it because I'd already seen the TV show. And I loved the TV show. I loved what they did with it. I feel like if I'd read this book first, I don't know how much I would have enjoyed it, but then I don't know. I just don't know, okay? I don't know. I then read 56 Days. This one got a 3.5 stars, but thinking about it, it probably deserves a 4, but I'm going to give it a 3.5. I'll stick with what Annie said. And this was a very quick read, involved COVID times. The plot twist, I had guessed the plot twist, but it was still good. It was good. COVID times with a couple, they meet in COVID, and then, do I need to give a description of the books? I've really not thought about this. Okay, we're gonna do one sentence. For 3.5 stars, I enjoyed. But it's not the best thriller in the world out there. I read Golden Pavements, which I probably have the physical copy of somewhere, because I better have it. If I don't, I'm gonna actually scold myself because it's my granny's book that she gave to me that she like won as like a library prize back in like the 1930s. And she gave it to me before she died and it was like, Annie, I want you to read this book because she loved it. But I have to be honest, I rated it a 2 stars. And I think that's a shame because it's actually part of a series. It's the 3rd book in a series. And I didn't know that going into it. And I'm just like, why did she give me the 3rd book? But you know, love you, Granny, and I appreciate that. But I did rate it 2 stars because it was just, because it was written in that time, there's a lot of offensive material in there. I then read Meditation on Murder, gave this 4 stars. If you love Death in Paradise, this is Death in Paradise in a book, quite literally. The Shelf by Helly Acton. I love this author. This was her first book. I've since read her other book that's out. She has a 3rd one that's out, but in hardback, and I want the paperback. I rated this 4.5 stars. When I first read it, it was a 5 stars, and then I was like, no, it's not. It's a 4.5 star reality TV show that is extremely sexist. It caused so many emotions out of my book, but it's like supposed to be sexist. It's not being ignorant. That's the difference, you know? Like, the book is intended to be sexist and you're intended to get annoyed about it. That's the point. The Night Circus, 3.5 stars. Very whimsical, magical. I do want to read more about this author, but it did take me a while to get through because I wasn't used to that sort of writing. The Cruise by Catherine Cooper. My god, when the twist came in this book, I got out my Google Docs document. I was typing up all the plot points and pinning them all together because I was like, oh my god, what just happened? I was calling Sam. I was like, what just went on? I loved this book. I don't know why I only rated it 3.5 stars. Well, I also do because, like, despite it being mental, there are better thrillers out there. There just are. I read like a lot of thrillers this year. Thrillers are my favourite, so I know that they're better than this. But at the time, I was blown away. I was Losing my marbles, man. I then read Spellslinger to try and get into more YA fantasies. Wasn't really for me. I enjoyed the book, but I didn't want to continue the series. It was a 3-star. Then I read Thunderhead. This is the second book in the Scythe series. I rated this 3 stars. No, I did not. I rated this 4.5 stars. Oh my god, we're only in January and I'm already making mistakes. I rated this 4.5 stars. I love the Scythe series. The first book was a 5 stars. And you know how dystopians they just always take the revolution route. Like, they just do. Which is fine, but sometimes I just want to live in the world. And that's what a book later on does. So that's all the 9 books that I read in January. So, moving on to February. February was when things kicked up a notch. In my reading, I went on to read 10 books. Did I? No. Yeah, 10 books in February. But we did start with a DNF. That is Close Quarters by Angus McAllister. It's very set in Glasgow. Like, street names, everything. It's so Glasgow. But it was just dull. It was just boring me to tears. It was a DNF. It was a DNF. Oh, I should say, my books, my rules. Or my video, my rules? Either way, I am the ruler. But I don't measure things well. Anyway, I include DNFs in my books, or like my total book count, because I read a good chunk of this and it wasted a lot of time. And I could have been reading a different book, so I allow myself that. If I've only read like 10 pages, nah, but if I'm like a good way into the book, maybe 100 pages, 150 pages, I will count it. I then read 5 Survive by Holly Jackson. I rated this a 4.5 stars, but part of me feels like if I reread it, it could be a 5 stars, and I really want to reread it. This is the author of the Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy, my favourite trilogy in the entire universe, so I was so excited to read her new book. But you were so good. 4.5 stars. The Little Coffee Shop of Kabul, 4 stars. This is really a very good like literary fiction, I'd say. A Fatal Crossing was 3.5 stars. It's a really good like detective fiction novel book type thing, like a cozy crime as well. So I would recommend it, and I do think I want to read like continuing the series. I don't actually know if it's a series, but Tom Hindle has like another book that looks similar to this, and I'm like, maybe it's a series. The No Show by Beth O'Leary. I love Beth O'Leary. I love her. I love her so much. And this, I saw this in Waterstones and I literally did, because I forgot it was coming out in paperback, and I was so excited. The ending made me sob. Did it make me sob? I wasn't emotionally on with my feelings back then, so I don't think it made me sob. It's later in the year that I really start my crying fit with books, but this was a 5 star. This was the first proper 5 star of the year. Glorious. And it's yellow. Yeah. Survive the Night by Riley Sager was a 3.5 stars. This started my Riley Sager love. I've now read 4 of his books and I'm going to read them all. I loved the premise and I just wanted them to stick to that premise, and they didn't for the sake of a plot twist, and it just annoyed me. I then read The Pharmacist, which I don't have a copy of, and that was 2.5 stars. Come to think of it, it's probably only like a 1 star to be honest. And then I went back into my Beth O'Leary backlog, yeah. And read The Flat Share by her. This was a reread. This is 4.5 stars. I love this book. I read this book way back when I started reading, and I still love it to this day. It's really, really good. I read Eenie Meenie by M.G. Ardledge. This was the first book in the D.I. Helen Grace thrillers. I read 4 of them now, and I really enjoyed this. I went on a hunt to find this book because the most recent one is called Cat and Mouse, and I saw that and I wanted to read that one, and then I was like, we'll just start a 13 book series to get to that book, so we start with this one. But that was a 4 stars. Another Beth O'Leary, The Switch. This was a 4 stars. But I love the concept, and I just love Beth O'Leary's writing. A 4 stars is still great. Why am I acting like this was a miss? It really was not. It's so good. The Girl Who Can Move Shit With Her Mind. Great title. I bought this because I got I didn't realise this was a floppy book, my guy. I got this because I accidentally bought the 4th book in the series and I thought that sounded great, so I went back to the beginning, and I never continued this series. I kept meaning to, and then I just never wanted to. It was only a 3 stars. The Couple by Helly Acton, same person that wrote The Shelf. This was a 5 star. This has been one of the best books that I've ever read, or one of my favourite books. It's not like this amazing literature thing. I just love it. You're in an alternate dimension where single people are treated the way that we treat couples and vice versa. So you're like frowned upon if you're in a couple. But the man in this book, I love him. I was so obsessed with this book. So obsessed. And I don't know why. I don't know why. But I was. 5 stars. 5 stars, man. 5 stars. Okay, moving into May, this was another 10 books this month, and we started with Jane Seymour. This is one of the 6 Tudor Queen books, number 3, all about Henry VIII's wives. It's just like a sort of biography of her life, but it's not non-fiction. It is told in a fictional way, and I really liked it. It was a 4 stars. The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. This was 4 stars. I don't know if I agree with that. I feel like it should be at least a 4.5. This book slid. It did. There were so many plot twists. The last plot twist was a bit outlandish for me, but I really enjoyed the book nonetheless, and I really would recommend this book. Love on the Brain, 4.5 stars. Ali Hazelwood nails it every time. She just does. She just does. And I won't argue with anything she writes. Actually, that's maybe not true because I've heard a lot of controversy with Checkmate and I've not read that book. So, but for now, her STEM romances are everything to me, and I love them. 4.5 stars. What an absolute delight. Little. This is the 3rd book in the Scythe series, just after Thunderhead. This was another 4.5 stars, and I just love this series, and this really did end it. And if I were in my emotional allowance stages, I would have sobbed. I would have sobbed. Gin Palace. This comes just after The Accidental Medium, which I read last year. I suppose that's 2 years ago now. And it's kind of women that can see ghosts, and they kind of solve crimes with that. And I wish more people would read these books because they're so entertaining. They only ever rate for me like a 3.5 stars because they're not like, they just are 3.5 stars. Yeah, I really enjoy them, and maybe that doesn't make sense to you, but it makes sense in my head. The Defense by Steve Kavanagh. He wrote, is it called 13? That one's about a serial killer on the jury or something. And that book's really popular, but it's actually part of a series, so I figured I'd start the series to get to that book. And then I never continued the series. This was a 3 stars. It's like a detective crime fiction novel. The Killing of Polly Carter, the next Death in Paradise book, even better than the first. Like, this is so Death in Paradise coded. I know that it is Death in Paradise, but it just feels like you're reading the TV show, and I love that. And I love that. Yes. Yes. Pop Goes the Weasel. This comes after Eenie Meenie in the D.I. Helen Grace series. This is probably my favourite book in the series so far out of all the ones that I read. I loved this book when I read it, but I only rated it 4 stars. Before I read Pop the Weasel, actually, I read My Killer Vacation by Tessa Bailey, my first ever Tessa Bailey book, and probably my last ever Tessa Bailey book, unfortunately. It was kind of a mix between trying to be crime and romance, and in the first chapter, I was amazed. I loved it. I was going so good, and then it just became so physical and it really irked me out, and I just did not enjoy it, and it just did not work for me at all. But yeah, that book was just a 2.5 stars. It ends at midnight, and I bought this book because it's so pretty. It's so pretty. It's gorgeous. It's so nice. But it was only a 3 stars. Just the story and plotline, I can't remember. The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. This was a 3.5. It's probably my favourite Lucy Foley I've read. I've only read this one in the Paris apartment. I need to read the guest list because I have it, and everyone says it's the best. But this one was only a 3.5 stars, but I did like the setting, and it did feel like a good, like, classic thriller. Like, a classic thriller is how it felt, but it was nothing special. It was pretty normal thriller. Like, if you think of a thriller, you'd think of this book, pretty much. And then the last book I read in March is ACOTAR. I finally picked up a Sarah J Maas book, and my god, did this send me on a spiral. So 4.5 stars for this book. I felt like it was good, but I didn't really see the hype. I didn't see much special about it. It took me ages to read the next book. But I really want to reread it, and I want to cringe at everything that happens in this book, knowing what goes on in the series. April! Jesus Christ, did I go off on that? Wait, hold on a minute. Can I just not read? In January, I read 9 books. In February, I read 12 books. In March, I also read 12 books. And in April, I also read 12 books. I don't know where the 10 came from. I can't read. I started April off with a bang with the Undiscovered Deaths of Grace McGill. And honestly, this felt more like a contemporary fiction than it did a thriller, or maybe more literary fiction. And I don't know why. But this was really good. It was really good. I was baffled by everything that happened. It was a 5 stars, but it was a strange 5 stars because I know this book is a 5 stars. It has to be a 5 stars, but yet I don't think of it, and it took me a while to read it. Like, I was very slow reading this book, but it is a 5 stars. I need to figure myself out. I then went off to Spain and read Truly Madly Guilty, which was my first Liane Moriarty book, and I enjoyed it. It was good. I think I want to read more of hers when I'm in the mood for them. So this only got 3 stars from me. During my time in Spain I had a DNF which was A Spoonful of Murder, and that's just because it wasn't hitting. I was bored. I did not care for any of it. Well, I loved the characters, but I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't force myself into that. I was in Spain. I wanted to have a nice time. So to give myself a nice time, I blessed myself with Impossible. One could argue that this is the best book I read this year. And I would not argue with them. I would agree. And that feels like such a big statement. I've not seen anybody talk about this book. Anybody. Why is that? Why? Why? This book's so good. I think a lot of people won't commit to it because the blurb tells you nothing. It's like, it just tells you that this gal and this guy talk on email, they decide to meet, and the universe throws an unexpected twist. That's all it tells you. That's all it tells you. And that intrigued me enough to read it. I was like, why not? Let's gamble. People, please gamble on this book. Please. It's so good. Oh, it's so good. 5 stars. And then I read another 5 stars. Lessons in Chemistry. What was going on? I got the Waterson special edition, which you can't really tell. Oh, there you go, you can see. It's got like all the chemical symbols in the background, and it's just so pretty. I read Under One Roof, a little novella. I think I just read this for no reason, because we were probably out and about and I just wanted to read something and it was on my phone. It was a solid 3.5 stars. Her novellas just kind of aren't it. How to Kill Men and Get Away with It. Oh, the guide. It's not actually the guide, but a solid 4 stars. I really enjoyed this book until the ending, where I was like, okay. Misery by Stephen King. Now, this was my first ever Stephen King book, inspired by our good friend Helly. I rated it a 3.5. It was like, I can see why it's a classic. I can see why it's a classic, but it just didn't hit for me. I wasn't scared. I didn't pick up on half the stuff that was going on. Maybe I'm just dumb, but like, there was one point where I thought I'd missed something, so I looked it up to see if I was alone in this, and then they figured it out 2 pages later. I just did not trust the book. I didn't trust the book to tell me, and I feel like maybe that's my fault. The Twyford Code. This is by Janice Hallett, and she writes books that are sort of told entirely in letters and emails, and in this one it's audio files. And I made it 227 pages in, and I DNF'd it, unfortunately, because it was just boring me to tears. A Flicker in the Dark. This was a 3.5 stars. It's a fine thriller. The ending was a bit like obvious, and there are a few plot holes in there that I don't even remember, but I remember there being plot holes, but I don't really remember. I don't really care. The Doll's House, book 3 in the Eeny Meeny Pop Goes the Weasel, D.I. Helen Grace time. Whoa, this was one of the better ones as well. I'd say probably Pop Goes the Weasel and this one were my favourites so far. Still a 4 stars. They're still ranging at 4 stars. And I think that's reasonable. They're always so floppy as well. They're so nice. So nice. Final book of this month. Riley Thorne and the Dead Guy Next Door. I keep meaning to continue this trilogy, and I've just not gotten around to it. I have the second book. I've just not gotten around to it. Also, would you believe that this is like, it doesn't look like it's a 500-page book. The murder doesn't hit. It just doesn't. But the romance is great. So that's why it could only be like a 4 stars. In my head, it's probably a 3.5 now. This is May. So, over May and June, I went a bit mental with my reading. I read 14 books in May, which is the most I've ever read. Ever. And I don't know how I did this, but I did do it somehow. But I did. I just did. We started with The Ask and the Answer by Patrick Ness. I then followed this up with the little novella that comes with the story, which is The Wide Wide Sea. So this got a 4 stars, The Wide Wide Sea got a 3 stars. This book's good. It continues the trilogy well, which is The Knife of Never Letting Go, and then this book, and then there's a third. I then read The Hating Game, which I don't have a physical copy of because I didn't like it, so it's been donated. That one was just a 3 stars. It was just it was a romance. It was a cheesy rom-com, and it was just that classic rom-com vibe, and I just didn't care that much. Why was she so obsessed with Smurfs? Beartown. I started this series and never continued it. I don't know if I will. I'm contemplating it, but I didn't so far. This was a 4 stars though. A very good like contemporary fiction. I think it's good for that. but I needed to be in the mood for it, and I think I was at the time, hence why it's a 4 stars, but if I weren't, then it would have been like a 2, because it probably would be quite dull to a lot of people. Missing Person by Sarah Lotz. So, Sarah Lotz wrote Impossible, the book, that book, which is a romance. This is not. All her other books are thrillers, and I don't know why. This book was good. I rated it at 4.5 stars. Floppiness probably contributed to that, let's be honest. And it was good. I really enjoyed it, although I felt like the ending was a bit anticlimactic. The ending felt anticlimactic because the person that did the crime, I felt like no one was like mad at him. I suppose they were, but no one was like going off on one, despite they should be. It's a 4.5 though. I read it very, very quickly. This is the second hardcover I read this year, but it's kind of, I only allowed it because it's kind of not a hardcover, because it's not, you know, it's not got a dust jacket. And I loved that, and it was a big yellow book, and I was like, I want it. I just want it. It was a 4.5 stars, Hotel 21. I read The X-Talk, which was a 2.5 stars, and it once again was just this your classic rom-com, and I just did not care. The Family Upstairs. Now, I feel like I can't fully discuss this until its sequel comes along. Why did I do that? Okay. Woman Eating. I read this in like 2 sittings in 1 day because it's so short. Vampires living in modern day society. Trying to fit in. That's what this is. Life Ceremony. So this is a bunch of short stories. Dystopian short stories. A few of them made me extremely uncomfortable. Rated it at 3 stars because some stories were really, really good and some stories I just did not get at all, and I found them really dull, so I figured it leveled out at a 3 stars. Akamath. It was a 5 stars. It was a 5 stars, and I need to reread this book because it's so good. It's 5 stars. Anyone who doesn't know, this comes after ACOTAR. So this is the second book in the ACOTAR series, A Court of Mist and Fury, and I loved it, and I ate this up, and I loved it. Anna of Cleves. So this comes after the Jane Seymour book in the Henry VIII series, and I DNF'd it, annoyingly. I just found it really dull. Meredith Alone. This is all about social anxiety. It really hit home, but yet I didn't adore it. It was 3.5 stars, but it was still good. She had a cat called Fred. It says it on the blurb. I didn't remember that, but I just got excited because I was like, oh, cat. Gleanings. Right, listen up. The Scythe world is a trilogy. It's a trilogy. You have Scythe, Thunderhead, and The Toll, and then you have Gleanings. This is like a book of novellas from the Scythe world, and I love it. I love Gleanings. I rated it 4 stars, but it should be more. It should be more. It really should be, because like I said, with the dystopian worlds, you usually have the revolution. That's, if you have a trilogy, you usually have the first book is the concept of the series, and then the next 2 books are the revolution. Take the Hunger Games, for example. But wouldn't we all want a book in the Hunger Games that had like little novellas from the other Hunger Games, just the world of the Hunger Games, little stories about what happened that aren't the revolution? Because I'd love that, and that's what this is. You get stories about the history of some of the characters you know, some of them that you don't, some that you've heard about but you didn't know anything about, and I love it. And I love it. Some stuff is before the revolution, some stuff is after the revolution, some stuff is during, and it's just, oh, it's so good. It's so good, man. It's so good. Okay, I somehow read 14 books in June, but we start it off with a bang. We start with How to Survive Your Murder. I bought this book because it looks like a Good Girl's Guide to Murder. Like, the font is similar, and it just gives me the vibe of a Good Girl's Guide to Murder. And I'm so proud of myself for that, for doing that, because this was a 5 stars. You just feel like you're in a slasher movie when you read this, and I loved it, and it was so funny, and there was a Sidney Prescott lookalike. And I literally mean a Sidney Prescott lookalike. ACOWAR, book 3 in the ACOTAR series, A Court of Wings and Ruin. This one, I was sobbing. If you would like a picture, evidence of that, I can probably provide. Cool. Yeah, I cried. This was a 4.5 stars. I just couldn't, it wasn't a 5 stars. It just wasn't. It wasn't as good as Akamath. ACOWAR wasn't as good as Akamath. Oh man. Oh, I'm tired. Things we never got over. Things we never got over. The start of the Knockabout series. I really enjoyed it. It was a 4 stars. It's a cute little romance. I don't care for the mafia on the side. I don't. I just don't. And that's why it's not a 5 stars. The Guest House at Lobster Bay. A DNF. It was like basic rom-com, but so cliche and so boring. Because then I read a 5-star read, which was Final Girls by Riley Sager. Once again, I love slashers, and this book is kind of like reading a slasher book. It's a bit scarier than his other books, but I loved it, I lived for it, and I love it. I love it so much. Then I went on to Things We Hide from the Light, which comes after Things We Never Got Over. This one was a 3.5 stars. I didn't like it as much as the first book. Once again, the main character guy in this book, he was going through so much. Why is his book when he's not himself? The Hive. I loved the concept of this book, but it was a 2 stars. It was so bad. Akafas. A Court of Frost and Starlight. This is just a little novella that comes in between Akawar and Akasif, which I loved, narrated 4 stars, and it's probably one of the best novellas I've read in my life, because usually novellas are quite shitty. The Taking of Annie Thorne. Did I get this book because it was called Annie? Yes. But it was a 3.5 stars. It was really interesting. I was like really confused through most of it, being like, oh my god, how did that happen? How? What is going on? And then as it was explained in a way that was like, oh, that was an option. I thought we were dismissing that. The Island, which I had on my TBR for a very, very long time. Young Annie bought this, and I thought I'd give her a try. It was a 3 stars. I liked the concept, but the twist at the end just kind of irritated me. I was like, what? Nah. The Trouble with Goats and Sheep. I thought this was like a thriller. It really wasn't at all. It's like a contemporary fiction about these 2 little girls, and it's really cute. It is, but it's not. It wasn't for me. It just wasn't for me. It was 3.5 stars, and I am going to send it to the charity shop. Right. Here's the sequel to The Family Upstairs. We have The Family Remains. Family Upstairs and The Family Remains. Like I said, originally when I read The Family Remains, it was a 3.5 stars. And then I read it with the sequel, and that made the first book so much better. Not because the sequel was bad, but because the sequel built on the first book. Like, in an amazing way. I've seen people read these books and be like, the second one wasn't necessary. And I suppose it isn't. But we were left with like one question in this book, and it probably doesn't seem important enough to have a whole other book to cover it. However, this book, when it covers it, it sort of re-goes through everything else and doesn't change anything, but it explains it in a way that's just like amazing. And I was taken aback. I was like, whoa. It was a 4.5 stars. And I was just like, because you see things from different people's perspectives than you saw them in the first book, and you're like, I get that now. That makes sense. Because any stupid decisions in the first book, they get explained. I suppose the main reason I read a lot of books in June is because I ended with 2 novellas, and they were Stuck With You and Below Zero, both by Ali Hazelwood, in her sort of like 3 novella book called Loath to Love You, I think. They were both 3 stars. They were fine. Once again, it's like smut in a novella. That wasn't for me. July. In July, I was back to reading 12 books, which fucking fabulous. Proud of me. Sorry, I'm so proud of myself. But I did start with My Heart is a Chainsaw, which is like, it's kind of like a slasher book, but not. It's a slasher book for slasher lovers, but in the sense of movies. I don't watch a lot of slasher movies, so this had a lot of references that I didn't get. And it was just so much inner monologue. I was so bored. Thing is, I have the second book of this series, and that book sounded so good. That's why I read this one. So I am going to read the second book. I powered through this boy. It was a 2 stars. Beach read. I read Beach Read by Emily Henry for the first time, and I loved it. It was a 5 stars. Need I say anything else? It was really good. Okay, yeah. Daisy Darker. How come I get another 2 5 stars in a row? How come? Although whenever I think about this book, I'm like, oh, I rated that at 4.5. But no, I rated it at 5. And I'm like, but it deserves a 5. Death Knocks Twice. Death in Paradise number 3. Getting even better. This one was a 4.5 stars. You and Me on Vacation by Emily Henry. Also a 5 stars. I don't see people talk about this book. Like, they talk about Emily Henry, and this book kind of comes up, but they mainly talk about Beach Read and book lovers. This is my favourite book of hers. I loved it. I loved the relationship, and I really liked the story of it being over different vacations. Even though we don't say vacations here, we say holidays, but I'll allow it, But 5 stars, I really enjoyed this, and I would really recommend it. Monsters of Men, this comes after Ask and the Answer. It also has a little novella with it, which is Snowscape. I think I rated them both 4 stars. Yeah. Black Lake Manor, 3.5 stars. It surprised me. Like, I thought that this book was going to be really boring, and it wasn't, but it also didn't catch my attention. Maybe it was boring. I don't know. Nothing more to tell. A DNF. I've read all of Karen M. McManus's books, apart from One of Us Is Back and You'll Be the Death of Me, and this one just didn't work for me. I felt young. Normally her books don't feel that young for me, but it felt really YA, and I didn't really care enough to read it. I just didn't care. I read My Sister the Serial Killer. That was fine. It was going really well, and then it just kind of went nowhere. And then the last book I read this month was Love in the Time of Serial Killers. This was a 3.5 stars. Time for August. In August, I read 10 books. I read 10 books in August. But I think it's good. I started the book with Acton, A Court of Silver 5. I enjoyed this book. I remember none of the plot. None of it. I don't remember any of it. I rated it 4 stars. I remember none of it. And that scares me. Runtime by Catherine Ryan Howard. She wrote The 56 Days, which was way back in January. Way back. So that's great. I loved this book. It was so good. It was really, really good. I rated it 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I read Killjoy by Holly Jackson. This is when I started my reread of the Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy. Started with Killjoy, the prequel. If you haven't read the prequel, it's really cute. I wouldn't recommend reading it first though. It works because I know the rest of the story, but if you didn't know the rest of the story, I feel like you'd find this boring and you wouldn't pick up a lot of the little Easter eggs in there. I love this book. I love it. I also started annotating them all. These aren't my annotated ones, so technically these aren't the ones I read. All my Google's Guide to Murder books are up here. My next book, I don't have the copy of because I've lent it away, and I don't think I'm ever going to get it back, and that infuriates me because I highlighted it all because it was so good. I read Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone, and it was really good. 5 stars. 5 fucking stars, alright? I loved it because it was so self-aware. Our narrator really talks to you, and he's telling you about everything that's happening, obviously. But he tells you on the first page, and he lists the pages that all the people die on, and I was like, my G. I then went on to read Liar Liar, which was a 4 stars, once again, in the Hell and Grace series, and this was the book that made me think, do I actually like the characters? I reread A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, 5 stars, no one's surprised. I loved these books. I would read them every day if I could. Maybe I wouldn't, but I would. Once again, 2 5 stars together. Jesus. Love Theoretically. Ali Hazelwood. I ate this up. STEM romance all the way. Like I said, she's a slay. Yes, I rhymed. So therefore, I'm right. I read Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This is the only book of hers that hasn't hit. I'm sorry. And then I finished my Google's Guide to Murder reread with Good Girl Bad Blood and As Good as Dead. Both of 5 stars, what can I say? Both of 5 stars. And then we go into September. Started September with The Assassin's Blade. Obviously, now that I'd finished the Akatar series, or at least what's out of it, I started Assassin's Blade, which is in the Throne of Glass series. This is the prequel. I loved it. 4.5 stars. I read The Summer Girl, which I think I rated 4 stars. I cannot tell because I used the colour yellow. This is part of the Avalon Bay series. There's 3 books out so far. There's The Good Girl Complex and Bad Girl Reputation. One was a 5 stars, one was a 1 star, so this one was good though. I enjoyed the characters in it. I understood their motivations. I thought they were really cute together, and I was giggling away. Okay. I DNF'd the Inheritance games, and I feel like that's controversial. I just found it tremendously dull, and all the characters irritated me. Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney, an icon. I love her. She nailed this. 4.5 stars. Things We Left Behind, the final book in the Knock 'Em Out trilogy. This one was good, but it wasn't as good as book 1, so 4 stars. I think book 1 got 4 stars anyway, but I don't care for the mafia side plot. I don't want it in there. I don't want it meddling with my romance. Wrong Place, Wrong Time. This book was good. I only rated it 3 stars because it had so much themes of motherhood and it made me slightly uncomfortable. 4 stars. The Bullet That Missed. This is the 3rd book in the Thursday Murder Club series. It was great. It was almost as good as the 2nd book, but it didn't quite make it there. It didn't quite hit as well as that one did. In Case of Emergency, I should have DNF'd this book. I should have. It was a 2.5 stars, but I should have DNF'd it. Why didn't I DNF it? I don't know. I forced my way through this book. Finished off the series with Throne of Glass. 5 stars. 5 fucking stars. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. What can I say? What can I say? October. I read 12 books. I read 12 books in September as well. Did I say 10? Started with Dial A for Aunties because I'd heard great things. All the characters, it was funny, but it was like a bit bland. So it was only like 2.5 stars for me, really. Went on to Crown of Midnight, loved it, 4.5 stars. I loved the way the series was going. Alice Feeney again, I Know Who You Are. This was a 4 stars. It's my least favourite of all her books, but it's really floppy, and it was one of those thrillers where you're like, oh my god, what actually just happened, you know? Like, it was that insane, but I live for that, and I feel like it deserves more love. The First to Die at the End. This is the prequel to They Both Die at the End, and I loved it. 4.5 stars. And I think about this book a lot. Like, a lot. When I think of books that I've read in 2023, I think of this book. There's Someone Inside Your House. I hope there's not, and I hope it's not this book, because it was rubbish, and it was a 2 stars. It was a slasher, but the main character just irritated me so much. So I couldn't stand it. I wanted her to die, but obviously she was the final girl, so like that's not gonna happen, but a girl can dream. Heir of Fire. Unfortunately, this was my least favourite of the whole series. Despite loads of people saying it was their favourite, I just found it quite boring and it took me quite a while to get through, so I would rate this one 4 stars. Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. This felt like reading a true crime documentary. And that's amazing. 5 stars. 5 stars. Did I guess the end? Yes, but was that the point? I think so. I felt like knowing the plot twist wasn't what didn't make this book bad. It actually kind of helped this book, and it did feel like reading a true crime documentary, and I'm a true crime girly all the way. The Hiking Trip. I don't remember the plot of this book. I don't, because at the same time I was reading this book, I was also watching a true crime video about Eleanor Neal's true crime video about these 2 girls on a hiking trip and like a murder, you know, and that's what this book was. So I don't know if the plot that I'm thinking of was a real plot that happened in the real world or was in this book. Could I read the blurb and find out? Yes. Am I going to? I should, but I won't. Just Got Real was a DNF because the main character just was unnecessarily angry with him. She stood him up. She was a catfish. She stood him up, catfished him, and watched from like a distance as he showed up for their date and was like, he's not going to call me back because he doesn't like what I look like. He really liked her. He didn't care what she looked like. And then he cheats on like someone later, and she thinks that he's the worst one in the world. You catfished him. The 7-Year Split by Ashley Boston. I was unsure about this book because I read The Dead Romantics last year, her first book, at least I think it was her first book, and I DNF'd it. I couldn't finish it, so I was like wary of picking this one up. And I loved it. It was a 5 stars. Like, I was sobbing. I had to run to the kitchen and find Sam and just be like, help me. I can't cope. Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. It was Halloween time when I read this, and honestly, I think that helped. It was a 4 stars. It's probably my least favourite Riley Sager book. I found it a bit boring. It's one of his longest. And it didn't really feel like a thriller, but it was definitely just like a haunted house vibe, but it didn't really feel that thrilling. The Ex-Hex. I've never read a book like this. Never read sort of that, like a witchy book. And I really enjoyed it for that reason. It was a 3... Where is it? Oh, it was a 4 stars, but I think it's probably more 3.5. It's kind of like Gin Palace in that way, where it's never going to make it above 4 stars, 3.5 stars. It's just not, but I can really enjoy it, but it's just not that quality. I then go into November with 9 books again. Once again, this was my lowest of the year, along with January, but I still think, I know why this is though. This one makes more sense because I was reading really thick fantasy books, so I understand why it was shorter. I started with Halloween Party on November 1st, which I don't know why I did. Well, I do know why I did that. It was an accident. I meant to read it the night before, but I just didn't finish my book in time. My first Agatha Christie book. This was a solid 3.5 stars. Murder in the Family. This book is told entirely with news clippings. It's mainly like scripts and stuff and screenplays and all that about this sort of documentary that's covering a murder from years ago using extra information from today's up-to-date database and stuff. And it was interesting. Did I guess the plot twist? I did, but I found it really fascinating and it was quite interesting to read like that, but it definitely takes me longer and I definitely felt a bit bored at points. Murder in the Caribbean. This was the final Death in Paradise book. There's only 4 of them. This was the best. This was 5 stars. This book needs to be in the show. Like, my goodness, this is a great story. It's a great murder mystery. It's really, really good. And I really think that they should turn this into a TV show episode. Queen of Shadows, the next book in the Throne of Glass series. This was another 5 stars. This is probably my favourite book in the whole series. Forever Interrupted by Taylor Jenkins Reid. First TGR book, and I can appreciate that, but it was only 3.5 stars. I found that, obviously, it made me want to sob. It did, because I was thinking about losing my own boyfriend in the way that this guy was lost. Released by Patrick Ness, same person that wrote the Knife of Never Letting Go trilogy. Fortunately, this was a DNF. I just didn't get it. It just didn't work in my head, and I just couldn't read any more of it. Make Me Clean by Tina Baker. This is like a cleaner who's murdering people, for her clients, which is a slay. However, the way it's told I didn't really like, and it was just sort of not what I wanted it to be, so it was only a 3.5 stars. I then went on to reread The Dead Romantics, and thank God I did, because it was a 4.5 stars. Obviously I DNF'd it last year, but that's because the ending's the best part. That's what made it. But as I was reading it, I was like, why did I DNF this? I think it's because I was in a stage where I was just not into fantasy books. I hadn't read many fantasy books by then, and it was just not my thing. Now it kind of is, which I like. Last book in November, This Delicious Death. This was a 3 stars. It started off so well, and I really wanted more for it, but it was kind of a book that felt like a sequel. I felt like there'd been a full event that happened, and then this takes place after that event, but I want to hear about that event. I want a book about that event. I read 10 books in December. And to be honest, 2 of them, I pretty much read the entirety of it in November, but I finished them in December. That's like how I do it. If I finish them it's the month I finish them in. So I started the month technically with Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn as a tandem read, where you read like some of the chapters of this book and then some of the chapters of this book, because they take place at the same time. But I read about half of this in November, so technically it's kind of 1 book for each month, but not realistically. These were both a 4.5 stars. You better watch out. You better not die. I had such high hopes for this book. Tremendously high hopes. And it did not hit at all. I read it in one night, completely skimmed it, despised it, 1.5 stars. No Exit by Taylor Adams. I need to read The Last Word by Taylor Adams. I just need to. I need to. Because this was really good. This was like a 4.5 stars. It really worked. I didn't know it was set on like Christmas times, which is great for December. But it was. And it was really good. And I really enjoyed it. Dying for Christmas. Now the first half of this book, right? The first half of this book, 5 stars. Second half of this book, nothing. I would have DNF'd it. I hated the second half. I hated what they did with the plot twist. I despised it. I just want it to be the first half of this book. If you're reading this book, just read part 1. Just read part 1, okay? Just read part 1. So overall it was a 3.5 stars, and I think that's me being generous. The 12 Dates of Christmas. I've read a Jenny Bayliss book last year for Christmas, and I really enjoyed it, so I read this one, and it didn't hit. I DNF'd it. I could tell what was going to happen. So therefore I didn't care, because I wanted to read Kingdom of Ash. This 980-page book before the end of the year, and I did. I read this in about 5 days. And I don't actually know how I did that. This was a 4.5 stars because the ending didn't hit like I wanted it to. But I love this series. I love this series. This series is one of my favourite series of all time. Not as good as A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, never get that wrong. I then read Running Blind. Oh, at some point, I read No Way Back, which was a novella. At some point I read that, okay? I just did. And that was like a D.I. Helen Grace little novella. And I'm going to say that that was probably like a 3 stars. Oh, it was. It was a 3 stars. and so was Running Blind, which is another novella. They're both kind of prequels. The last physical book I read this year was Secluded Cabin Sleeps 6, and I read this quite quickly. I quite enjoyed it. It was like a 3.5 stars, like in 3 stars probably. And then the final book I read this year, after I got my Kindle, I read The Gift by Frida McFadden, because it was a really short little novella and I really wanted to read a Frida McFadden book, and I really enjoyed it. It was 4 stars. Oh my god, I did it, and now I can put everything away. Oh, and my phone's about to run a charge. Okay, yay!